Hi, I'm Brett Blumenthal, and I am the artist behind Tiny Toes Design and Brett Blumenthal Studio. Today, I wanted to share with you my very favorite tools while I create watercolors. If you would like a full comprehensive guide on all of the watercolor supplies that you could need for creating beautiful watercolors, download my free watercolor supply guide and you'll get all the information you want. But today I want to just share the few things that I use on a daily basis. I really want to make the point that you do not need to buy a ton of supplies to create beautiful watercolors. I first want to start with paint. Paint obviously is one of the most important things. I use Van Gogh watercolor paints. They are by far wonderful paints and they're pretty economical, and both students and professionals can get a lot out of them. They are created by a company called Royal Talens out of Holland, and they create beautiful quality watercolors that you will be very happy using. I have also started using Daniel Smith watercolors as well. Both types are very high in quality and life fastness and vibrancy, all of which are important to creating great watercolors that will last. When I first started with watercolors, my watercolor palette was pretty neutral because I love creating very realistic art of animals and nature. And so I didn't really get into vibrant colors until I was a little further along and had time to test my skills with watercolor. And so now I enjoy painting with more vibrant colors such as ultramarine, permanent red light, and some yellows and greens as well. Let's move on to brushes. I have always used Princeton brushes. When I first started, I purchased a very cheap package of brushes that were Princeton, and they served me very well. And then when I got better at watercolors, I started to use their higher end brushes. I especially like the Aqua Elite brand as well as Velvet Touch, but I can also recommend Heritage brushes. Now, which brushes do I like using the most? I really only use 3 types of brushes most of the time. I love my flat brush because my flat brush is a perfect tool for creating beautiful washes, and it's also great for creating textures within bodies of water or on mountainsides. The flat brush is a very useful tool for a variety of functions. I also use round brushes. These are pretty versatile, and I would say if you only buy one brush, that's the brush you should get. I use a 6 brush as well as a 12 brush. When you look at sizes, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and above, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, those are the size of the brushes. So if you use a 6 or under brush, they're usually for smaller details. The 12 brush or higher brushes like 14, 16 are used for large areas of painting. So you don't want to use too large of a brush when you're trying to get small details, and obviously you don't want to use a small brush when you're using them for larger spaces. Finally, the last brush that I use a lot is my liner. I love the liner because it lets me get all those interesting details like fur and little lines in the feathers of a bird, all of those little tiny details that make my art specifically look so realistic. Finally, paper. You cannot miss the paper. And I will tell you, I learned a tremendous amount about paper. When I first started out, I was using something called Tombow dual brush markers to paint. I know it sounds crazy, but it worked. And it was my foot in the door into watercolors. And so I purchased a very cheap pad of watercolor paper, and that watercolor paper was made out of something called cellulose, not 100% cotton. There is a huge difference in the results you will get when you use 100% cotton paper. So if you're going to go out and buy paper, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get 100% cotton paper. Now, personally, I love Arches as a brand. I am starting to test out some other papers as well, But I do recommend Arches because not only do they produce beautiful papers, but they're also pretty economical compared to some of the other brands out there. I use the pads of Arches paper, but they also make something called blocks. The blocks are useful if you don't want to have to tape your paper down to a desk or a substrate to keep it from warping. But I do enjoy taping my papers down because I love getting that beautiful white, crisp border around my artwork when I lift up the tape. So that is pretty much it. And once again, I would love for you to go check out my watercolor supply guide, and that's going to provide you the best resource for anything you want to learn about watercolor supplies. Thank you so much for watching. And although this is my very first watercolor tip video, there will be a lot more to come in the future. So stay tuned, please subscribe, and definitely feel free to leave any comments or thoughts down below so I know what you have to say about your favorite watercolor supplies.